on the pragmatic level, the war on drugs fails. That's not the only way to look at the issue. The other way to look at it is what sort of benefits or detriments has the war on drugs brought to us? And unfortunately, the answer is it's brought almost all detriments, and some horrifying detriments. First of all, we have, and this is in no particular order, we've got corruption. When you take the distribution, the sale of a particular item, no matter what it is, and make it criminal, you force it into a black market. When it's forced into a black market where you have a limited number of people who are willing to risk their lives, risk their freedom in order to produce or distribute the good or service, the result of that is the price is going to go up. This is simple economics. If the price goes up, there are greater profits. If there are greater profits, there are greater opportunities for people to make money. And if you're talking about a criminal class where you've driven everybody out so that it cannot be legitimately distributed, and the only people distributing the good or service are people who are risking criminal penalties, it's going to be attractive to those people to use money, the currency, in order to ease the transfer of the product. Well, who are the people that are going to be bribed, for use of a better word, a descriptive word, in order to be able to ease the distribution of that black market product? The answer are police, courts, government officials of every kind. And that is why we sporadically and over again in virtually every state of the union and every police department, we see policemen becoming involved in the drug trade. The very thing that they're supposed to be out arresting people and throwing them in jail for, they end up skimming off large amounts of money in bribes and becoming involved in the drug trade themselves. This corrupts the police department, no kidding. And it also corrupts everyone else who gets involved in it, whether it's a politician, whether it's somebody who's seemingly using one business as a front for distribution of drugs. Everyone is corrupted by this, particularly the police. And they have to be corrupted because, first of all, they're being asked to do a practically an impossible job. As we pointed out a few minutes ago, drugs are available everywhere, and the police are supposed to be out there arresting people. Why is it so difficult for them to enforce these laws? Well, the first thing that jumps out at you is that there are no victims. With most crimes, the victims contact the police. 911, yes, can I help you? I'm being assaulted. Please send a police officer. Police officer gets into a car, goes, and there's a witness, namely the victim, says, I was assaulted. By whom? By that person. Okay, you're under arrest. Job's pretty easy. It can be more complicated than that, but that's the paradigm. But the following never happens. 911, yes, what's your emergency? Please send a policeman, I'm about to smoke some weed. Hurry, because it's going to happen in about 2 minutes. And the police run out and they open and knock on the door and there you are, and so they arrest you. That never happens. So therefore, the only way for the police cannot count on so-called victims. Of course, there aren't any victims, but they can't count on the only people involved in the transaction, the forbidden transaction, to report themselves. It's very rare, although it does occur, where one person reports another person, usually because they see there's some money in it somehow. Again, more corruption. But in fact, the police have a hard row to hoe here. So what do they do to make up for this? Well, they resort to trickery, enticement, undercover usage, things of that nature, which itself gets them involved in the black market drug culture, which gives another opportunity for corruption. See how this works? It all works in a circle. However, besides police corruption, perhaps the most important, the most significant thing about the factor to be looked at in terms of what's the benefits and detriments of the war on drugs, it's violence. Violence is the inevitable consequence of the criminalization of possession of drugs or any other object. I mentioned the prohibition before. If you think back, the 1920s or 1930s, you can't think back and recall it, but you've read about this, between 1920 and 1933, when alcohol alcohol distribution was illegal in this country, that spawned a whole bunch of things we now take for granted. Gangs, gang violence, drive-by shootings, police corruption that I mentioned before. All of this came out of the 1920s, the 1930s, because that was the time period when this entire industry was driven underground. And it was driven underground, creating this subclass of violent criminals, Al Capone, his ilk, etc. And they virtually invented the whole notion of drive-by shooting that we now take for granted. Remember the people with the Tommy guns in Chicago and all of that? Before that time, before Prohibition, it simply didn't exist. This is what happens when you drive an entire sub-economy underground. Why? Why do they have to resort to violence? Why do people involved in the drug trade have to become violent with one another? After all, can't we just all get along? What's the deal with that? What distinguishes that from people who distribute legal drugs? You know, Bayer Aspirin. They have a gang. You know, are they
the FDA?
The FDA.
Oh, the FDA. But we don't see wars between Budweiser and Miller Lite where the guys driving the trucks down the road are shooting at each other. It doesn't occur. Why? What's the difference between that and the distribution of illegal drugs and other narcotics? The difference is that the people in the underground economy have no way to enforce contracts. You know, if you do me bad in a drug deal, I can't sue you. I don't get any. I'm sitting there all day long in Superior Court. I never get drug deal cases where people are suing each other for breach of contracts. Here's our agreement. He was supposed to give me 3 kilos of this. He was supposed to, and he didn't. He shortchanged me, Judge. Help me. That never happens because that's an illegal contract. Therefore, they can't come to court. They also can't come to court to enforce territories. You know, in terms of I've got exclusive dealership in this area, and you can't compete with me, etc. Then maybe we reach an agreement. And wait a minute, you infringe on my deal. You can't do that. Well, I'm going to sue you. You've breached the franchise agreement. You've got the dealership in this area of the city. You breached it. I'm going to sue you. You can't do that when you're distributing meth. It doesn't work that way. So there's only one way to resolve territorial disputes and contractual disputes, and that's force, violence, or the threat of violence. And we see that during alcohol prohibition, and we see it again today. And it's almost impossible to imagine the amount of violence that the drug war has spawned. How many people have been shot? How many children have been shot and maimed? How many drive-by shootings have there been? How much violence has gone on within that trade? And that's only one kind of violence. The other kind of violence are the people being arrested and thrown into prison. And that is a form of violence also. And they're being locked up. They're being taken out of the workforce. We have a lack of productivity because we have more people in prison in this country than any other civilized country in the world by percentage. So we have these thousands and thousands and thousands of people sitting, wasting away in cells that we're all paying for with taxes at a fairly high rate, being watched by other people. And can those people be productive? Well, maybe they make license plates or whatever. But that's not really productive in any true economic sense. It's a dead bang loss.